So that kind of raises the question then, I mean, this is all phenomenal news, right? And, I think part of the reason that as we were looking for where to put the resources and energy of my family's strongest hearts, this was a no-brainer, right? But obviously nothing is perfect. So what are some of the concerns, challenges as, Hunterian's been around for, almost a decade, 8 years, but in the last couple of years, what are the challenges you're concerned about as we continue to move forward here?
So the greatest strength of CRISPR is this ability that we're talking about to go after all of these different mutations and to do it in parallel.
Right.
And as we discussed, that was a really important thing, that we were going to help as many patients as possible. We're not going to just go after the important things. The issue with that, or the complexity with that, is that that's a lot, right? That's, it's a lot of work. It
Right.
requires, resources and managing that sort of, it's a larger team. But overall, it's much faster. There's a lot of reasons why doing it in parallel is actually, much, much, much quicker and much, overall, much less resources than if one were to do it sequentially and then go through and try and address. And not to mention the amount of time that some patients, just based off of what their mutation is, might not have an available treatment.
Right.
So the complexity is moving from that small molecule world mentality of one thing at a time to something where, and we're not in, and the reason why DMD is so great is because as a therapeutic target is because the amount of mutations and the percentage of patients that we can address with a small number of therapeutics, it allows us really to make the biggest impact as quickly as possible.
Right, which was something we talked about early on. I mean, obviously, when we found out about Jack and his mutation, the first thing that you want to do is treat that, right? Because that's the natural instinct of a parent to say, we have to fix this. But, one of the things that we talked early on about and that I was convinced then and now of is that it's by focusing on the entire genome, by focusing on the, from all the mutations and all the hot spots, which would cover about 90% of the kids, it's going to be a rising tide lifts all ships types of scenario versus a lot of where the focus has been today, which is on, exon 51, which, yes, it's the biggest hotspot, but it's also 16% of 13% of making me look bad. But 13%, right? So it's the biggest hotspot, but it's still, just above single digits in terms of the group that would be treated with that. So the complexity is that you're going after more. But the benefit then of that challenge is that the more it will create economies of scale, for lack of a better term, and actually treat a much larger group of people when it's done.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what the dream is, and the dream not being that far away, is that the moment something is noticed that is wrong, a patient is sequenced, right? We figure out what that mutation is. So what we need to do is we need to cut the time, the sort of diagnostic odyssey thing needs to shrink, right? It really should be, down to zero.
Right.
And then you can imagine, once you know what mutation a patient has, if you have, let's say it's half a dozen programs that can cover all of those, that patient then just slots into one of those programs. And what we would do is once we sequence, we know exactly what their mutation is. We would then engineer that into the stem cells. So that allows us to now validate that that mutation, this product is going to correct it. This is the level of correction that we anticipate. And then the person can actually get that treatment. And that way, it's all going on in parallel. The next person that happens to come and have a mutation, maybe it's not, maybe it's something different, maybe it's the same one. It doesn't matter because we've created a net where we can capture the most numbers of patients.
Yeah. No, and I think the dream, again, I've talked about this in other forums and I've talked about it on our blog and things like that was, our journey was nearly 6 years long. right? And I think that's probably a little bit shorter for
That's the
children.
average
I know, right? But I
for
think
rare disease. Yeah.
for rare disease in general, and I think it's a little bit shorter for DMD because it's more symptomatic earlier. But what we're really talking about is a kid has a swab when they're born, or potentially even one day in utero, right?
Yeah.
And they're receiving that treatment almost immediately. And, for some kids, then it becomes basically something that's a non-factor in life. I mean, that's really nirvana, right?
Yeah, you've hit on it, right? Like the quicker you can detect something, the quicker you can treat something.
Right.
So everything exists right now to do the detection, right? It's really just will and implementation.
Right.
That's something that people can do. It's not what we do, but that's something that, and it doesn't, that's going to require effort and getting the community, to enforce that, get that in play. The thing that's been missing is the therapeutic, right? Having
Right.
now, if you get the diagnosis, what are you going to do?
Right.
That's now there, right? That final piece is now available, and it's available across the whole, spectrum of mutations.
Right.
And it would be a shame in this time when all of these things are coming together not to help the maximum number of patients.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'm gonna wrap up on this one. You know, you obviously had a ton of success so far. I think we've been, speaking from a strongest heart standpoint, tears of joy after a couple conversations, which I know makes you uncomfortable, but that's part of this process too. But I think what I would really love to talk about, and I think you were touching on it, is bringing it kind of full circle. Where do you envision really, 10 years from now, we're sitting here, we're having a conversation. Where have we gone over 10 years? Where do you envision CRISPR taking DMD, BMD, or really any rare disease, right? But, for the purposes of what we're doing today, where do you see this really going? What would your vision be if you could, do it without having to worry about anything else?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you hit it on the head. Of course, DMD and BMD is where we are focused initially. Um, that is likely going to provide the path for other diseases. So it's important to know that it's not just we're trying to cure DMD. We're trying to address genetic diseases as a whole, and DMD is a great way to do that, to get to other diseases. The ways that we're addressing DMD is a lot like the way you would address other diseases.
Right.
So the ultimate goal, right, is somebody's born, and if there's something wrong, we find out what that is as soon as possible. The next thing is having a treatment that is available to address that. Is there a way to correct that? Clearly, things in like DMD and BMD, you want to treat early. You want to treat before sufficient damage has kind of gone past the point of no return.
Right.
So clearly earlier is going to be better. Dosing is likely going to be lower, and safety is likely going to be better. There's all kinds of reasons why treating earlier would be preferable. And then, that person now, the dream would be if somebody that was, constrained to live in a wheelchair grows up and has a normal life.
Right. Right. And they're aware of their condition. So, later in life, when they decide to have children, start a family, we're also able to potentially make different choices with genetic counseling in terms of how families move forward as well, which, for all intents and purposes, could actually stop a disease from being passed on or carried on as well.
Absolutely. And the amazing thing is everything that we have talked about already exists.
Yeah. Yep.
We just have to get there.
We're gonna do it. So,
Yeah.
well, I keep looking at my phone. I promise I'm not checking my email. But I think one of the biggest things that we appreciate and that we, the Strongest Hearts in Hunterian, had committed to with all the donors was these conversations, really making sure that we're sharing with everybody because I think it's important, right? And you know, this has been hopeless for a lot of people for a long time, and I think what we're really seeing, especially with some of the other therapeutics that are coming out that deal, you know, non-steroidal things that are dealing with some of the symptoms today, is that there could now be a real bridge between this side of the river where we are, where, you know, treatment options are limited, and where we're going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, Dr. Vinny, I appreciate it. You are at the end of a 7-day conference. So the fact that you showed up to do this, we can't thank you enough. For all of our supporters, everything that we talked about today is a result of the dollars that you have donated, the effort that you have put in for our volunteers, and for everything that you've done for us. To continue to stay involved as we move forward in our research. Please click the link, donate, volunteer time, spread the word. But we thank you so much. And we are going to be doing one of these about once a quarter now, I think was the goal.
Sounds great.
Yeah. And as we get more data, that will be shared. So again, we thank you all so much. And Dr. Vinny, thank you.
pleasure.
It's always good to see you. And I know you need to get home to your wife and your Frenchie, right?